My name is Edward Miller. I am 91 years old. Most people think the hardest part of war is the fighting. They're wrong. The hardest part is living long enough to remember the promises you didn't keep. I made mine in 1943 on a cold morning in a small English town that most people have never heard of. I was 22 years old, wearing a uniform that didn't quite fit yet, pretending to be braver than I was. Her name was Margaret Collins. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't loud. She didn't cry easily. That's probably why I loved her. We met before the war swallowed everything. Before blackouts and ration cards and casualty lists taped to church doors, she worked at a local library, and I fixed radios. That's how it started. She needed help repairing one that had stopped working, and I needed an excuse to stay longer than necessary. We talked about ordinary things, the kind of future you only imagine when you're young and haven't yet learned. How fragile plans are. When the letter came ordering me overseas, I didn't tell her right away. I kept it folded in my pocket for 2 days, touching it like if I didn't open it again. It might disappear, but it didn't. The night before I left, we walked along the river. No speeches, no dramatic goodbyes. Just silence, broken by the sound of water moving forward without hesitation. "I'll come back," I said. I didn't say if. I didn't say when. I said it like it was a fact. Margaret stopped walking and looked at me, the way people look at something they want to believe but don't quite trust you promise. She asked, and that's where everything went wrong. I should have said, "I'll try." I should have said, "I hope so." I should have been honest about fear. Instead, I smiled and said, "I promise." People talk about promises like they're just words. They're not. They're weights, and they get heavier with time. I shipped out to Europe 2 weeks later. Infantry. France first, then moving east as the war dragged on longer than anyone had predicted. Days blurred into each other, mud, cold, fear that settled into your bones and never really left. Margaret wrote to me at first, long letters, careful handwriting. She told me about small things, new books at the library, neighbors getting married, the way the town felt emptier every month. I wrote back, at least at the beginning. I told her I was fine. I told her not to worry. I told her things I thought a man was supposed to say, but the war changed me faster than I expected. I saw men die who had made promises to some to sweethearts, some to children who wouldn't remember their faces, some to themselves, and every time it felt like the universe was laughing at the idea that we had any control at all. So I started pulling away. Not because I stopped caring, but because caring felt dangerous. Her letters became harder to read. Not because of anything she wrote, but because of what they asked of me. They asked me to imagine a future, to believe I would survive, to believe that love could wait while the world burned. I started telling myself lies. I'll answer tomorrow. She understands. This is just temporary. Weeks passed. Then months. I missed one letter. Then another. Then several. Margaret never accused me of anything. She never begged. She never wrote angry words. That almost made it worse. In one of her later letters, she wrote, "I don't need you to be brave for me. I just need to know you're still there." I folded that letter carefully and put it in my pack, and I never answered it. By 1944, the fighting intensified. Normandy, then further inland. Losses mounted. Friends I'd trained with were suddenly names spoken in past tense. And here's the truth I don't like admitting. Even now, I was afraid to come back, not afraid of dying. I had already accepted that possibility. I was afraid of surviving and not being the man who left. I had seen things I couldn't explain, done things I couldn't undo. I didn't know how to bring that version of myself home and lay it gently into the life I'd promised Margaret. So instead of facing that fear, I avoided it. The war ended in 1945. People celebrated, strangers hugged, cities rang with bells and music. I felt nothing. I came home thinner, older, quieter. England looked the same. But it wasn't. Or maybe I wasn't. I didn't go see Margaret right away. I told myself she might have moved on, that showing up after so long would only reopen wounds, that my promise had expired. Weeks turned into months, and then I heard she had married someone else. A kind man, people said. A schoolteacher, stable, present. Everything I had slowly stopped being. I didn't attend the wedding. I didn't send a letter. I didn't even allow myself to be angry because I had no right to be. Years passed. I built a life, a respectable one. One married. I worked. I smiled in photographs. But some promises don't disappear just because time passes. They wait, and they grow teeth at night. I still hear her voice asking, "You promise?" And I still see myself saying, "Yes." Asterisk, I didn't see Margaret again. Not in person. Not in passing. Not even by accident. Life has a cruel way of making sure of that. Years went by the way. They always do when you're busy pretending you're fine. I married a woman named Helen. She was kind, patient, sensible. The sort of woman people said was good for me. And maybe she was. We built a quiet life together. Children, a modest house. Sunday routines, the kind of life that looks complete from the outside. But there are absences you can't furnish over. There are rooms inside you that stay empty, no matter how much you put around them. I never told Helen about Margaret, not fully. I mentioned someone before the war once, vaguely the way men do when they're trying to sound honest without being vulnerable. Helen didn't press. She trusted me. That made the guilt worse. Margaret stayed locked in a part of my mind I never visited in daylight until 1968. Was the year my mother died. She'd kept everything. Letters, receipts, old programs from concerts she never attended again. When I was clearing out her house, I found a small wooden box tucked behind a stack of linens in the hallway. Closet. Inside were letters. My letters, Margaret's letters. All of them, the ones I had sent. And the ones I hadn't answered, my mother had collected them carefully, tied with a faded blue ribbon. She must have known they mattered. Mothers usually do. I sat on the floor of that empty house and opened the first one. Margaret's handwriting hadn't changed. Still neat, still careful, still hopeful in a way that felt almost unbearable to read now. The early letters were full of belief. She wrote about waiting, about counting days, about telling herself that silence didn't mean abandonment. Then the tone shifted. Not dramatically, not angrily, just quieter. In one letter she wrote, "I walk past the river sometimes and imagine you beside me, still saying you'll come back. I don't know if I'm foolish for holding on, but I don't know how to stop." That sentence sat in my chest like a stone dot. Another letter came months later. "I met someone today. I don't think it means anything. I wanted to tell you because I promised myself I'd always be honest with you, even if you're no longer honest with me." She still believed in honesty, even when I didn't deserve it. The last letter was dated October 1946. The war had been over for more than a year. Aya had been home, alive, free, and absent. Her words were simple. "I've waited as long as I can without losing myself. I hope you're safe. I hope you're happy. I'm letting you go now, not because I stopped loving you, but because I have to start living." There was no bitterness, no accusation, just acceptance. That's what finally broke me. People think guilt comes from doing something terrible. Sometimes it comes from doing nothing at all. I realized then that Margaret hadn't been taken from me by war. I had chosen not to return, not because I couldn't, but because I was afraid of what I'd become. Instead of trusting her with that truth, I denied her the choice. I sat there for hours, surrounded by dust and silence, holding a life I had walked away from. I wanted to write her, even then. 20 years too late. I didn't, because by then, I finally understood something I hadn't at 22. Some doors don't close loudly. They close gently. And once they do, you don't get to knock. Years later. Helen passed away, cancer slow, unforgiving. In the weeks after the funeral, I found myself thinking about Margaret again. Not romantically, not longingly, but honestly. I wondered who she had become, whether she had been happy, whether letting me go had freed her or scarred her. I did something I had avoided my entire life. I asked. It wasn't difficult. Small towns remember. Names linger. People age, but stories don't vanish. Margaret had stayed in the same town. She had married the school, had 2 daughters, taught literature at the local secondary school. People said she was warm, thoughtful, a good listener. They also said she never talked about the war or about me. She had died in 1992. I stood outside the church where her funeral had been held years earlier. I didn't go in. I didn't have the right. I walked to the river instead. The same river where I had promised her I'd come back. The water looked the same, always moving forward, never waiting. I finally understood what that promise had cost her. It wasn't just a future with me, it was years of uncertainty, of paused decisions, of emotional limbo. I had asked her to put her life on hold while I figured myself out, and then I never returned to release. Her war takes many things from people: time, youth, innocence. But sometimes it gives you an excuse to delay, to avoid, to disappear behind circumstances. And I used it. I didn't break my promise because I was cruel. I broke it because I was weak. And weakness, left unexamined, does just as much damage. I thought the worst of it was behind me. I thought once I'd read the letters, once I'd accepted that Margaret had lived a full life without me, the ache would soften. That understanding would bring closure. It didn't. Understanding doesn't erase responsibility. It sharpens it. The thing that finally forced me to confront the full weight of my absence came not from the past I remembered, but from a past I never knew existed. It happened in 2003. I was 80 years old and living alone by then. The house was too quiet in a way that felt permanent. One afternoon, I received a letter addressed to me in handwriting I didn't recognize, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Mr. Miller, you don't know me, but I believe you knew my mother." Her name was Margaret Collins. I had to sit down. My hands weren't steady anymore, and neither was the world. The letter continued. "I found your name in a box of letters after she passed. She never spoke of you, but she kept everything. I don't know what you meant to her, and I don't know if you'll want to hear from me, but I felt you should know she waited a long time for you." Her daughter, Margaret's daughter. The idea that someone else had lived their entire life carrying the echo of something I'd abandoned was more than I was prepared for. She didn't accuse me. She didn't ask for explanations. She didn't even ask for a response. She simply told me the truth. Margaret had delayed marriage longer than people expected in those days. Not dramatically, just quietly, turning down offers, choosing solitude over settling, her daughter wrote. She once told me that waiting isn't foolish if you're waiting for something honest. But she also said that knowing when to stop waiting is the hardest kind of courage. I read that line again and again, because it meant Margaret had turned my absence into a lesson for her child. Not a wound, but a warning. That night, I did something I had never done. I spoke her name out loud, not in memory, not in regret, but in accountability. I wrote back. It took me 3 days to find the words, and even then they felt insufficient. I told her daughter the truth, not the softened version I'd told myself for decades. I told her I had promised to return. I told her I had been afraid. I told her I had chosen distance over honesty. I didn't ask for forgiveness. Some things don't deserve it. Weeks later, she replied, "Thank you for telling me." My mother believed that truth mattered more than comfort. I think she would have appreciated this. That was all. No reconciliation, no absolution, just acknowledgement. And oddly, that was enough to change something inside me for the first time. I stopped framing myself as a victim of circumstance. I had survived the war. I had come home. I had options. Margaret hadn't taken those. Options from me. I had refused to use them. That realization followed me everywhere. After that, I began noticing how often people use time as an excuse. "I'll call tomorrow. Explain later." When things calm down, as if life ever calms down, as if silence isn't a choice. I started speaking differently to people, more directly, more honestly. If I didn't want something, I said so. If I cared, I showed it. If I was afraid, I admitted it, not because I was brave, but because I knew the cost of avoidance. I visited the library where Margaret had once worked. It had been renovated, modernized, stripped of its old charm, but the bones were the same. I imagined her there, shelving books, helping children find stories that made sense of the world. I realized then something I wish I'd known at 22. Love doesn't need certainty. It needs presence. Margaret hadn't needed a guarantee that I'd survive the war. She had needed me to come back and face whatever we became. Together, I had denied her that dignity. People often ask me if I regret not ending up with her. Question: the real regret is that I didn't trust her with the truth of who I was after the war. I decided, for her, that I wasn't worth returning. And in doing so, I took away her right to choose. That's a quiet kind of cruelty, one that hides behind good intentions and fear and self-protection. By the time you realize what you've done, the damage is already woven into other lives. I used to think regret was loud. I imagined it as something that arrived suddenly, a moment of collapse, a sharp realization that split your life into before and after. I was wrong. Regret is quiet. It waits until there's nothing left to distract you, until the house is empty, until the people who might forgive you are no longer alive to do so. It took me most of my life to understand what Margaret had done after I disappeared. Not in bitterness, not in anger, but with grace. Her daughter's letters stayed with me, not because they reopened old wounds, but because they closed something I had left unfinished. For the first time, Margaret was no longer just a ghost of who she might have been with me. She was a whole person, someone who lived fully despite my absence. That was the final lesson. Margaret did not waste her life waiting for me. She waited as long as she could without losing herself. Then she chose differently. That's something I didn't understand when I was young, and something many people still don't understand now. Waiting is not love. Endurance is not devotion. Silence is not patience. Love requires participation. When I promised I would come back, I didn't just promise a physical return. I promised engagement, courage, honesty, a willingness to be seen, even broken. And when I failed to do that, Margaret didn't chase me. She respected herself enough to move forward. That is not a tragedy. The tragedy was thinking she would wait forever in my old age. People sometimes ask me if I ever loved her. I tell them the truth, yes, but love, untreated, becomes something else. It becomes nostalgia. It becomes fantasy. It becomes a story you tell yourself to avoid. Accountability. Real love is action. It's showing up even when you're afraid of who you are. It's trusting someone with your worst self, not just your best. It's returning, not perfect, but present. I didn't do that, and the cost wasn't just mine. I think often about that morning by the river in 1943, about how young we were, how certain we sounded, how casually I used the word promise. If I could speak to that young man now, I wouldn't tell him to be braver in battle. I would tell him this: don't promise what you're not prepared to fulfill, and don't disappear when it's time to face the consequences of who you've become. The war ended, but for Margaret, the waiting ended too, not because she stopped loving, but because she chose life over uncertainty. That is the part of her story I honor most now. I visit that river sometimes. It's quieter than it used to be. Or maybe I am. I stand there and watch the water move forward, just as it always has. And I think about how many people are standing still somewhere, waiting for someone who isn't coming. If you are listening to this and someone is waiting for you emotionally, honestly, patiently, don't let silence be your answer. If you don't want to return, say so. If you're afraid, admit it. If you love them, show it in action. Because leaving someone in uncertainty is not kindness, it's abandonment, dressed as caution. I lived a full life after the war. I had love. I had family. I had meaning, but I also lived with the knowledge that I once asked someone to wait, and then never came back to release them. Margaret did not owe me forgiveness. What she gave instead was something better. An example she showed me that love does not beg. It does not linger forever in unanswered silence. It chooses dignity. That is what I carry with me now, not the life we didn't have, but the lesson I learned too late. If this story reached you, don't let it end here. Look at the people in your life, the ones waiting for a call, for honesty, for effort. Don't promise tomorrow. Choose today, because some promises don't break loudly, they just fade, and by the time you notice, the person you made them to has already learned how to live without you.